Hello and welcome to Louise.e.singleton Creations. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can make this beautiful jewellery cheaply and easily with items from around your home and with some plaster of Paris and with some clay. It's so much fun. You will just be dying to try it out. So sit back and enjoy my tutorial. The first thing you're going to need for this project is some clay, which I'm just rolling out here. I'm going to put the names of all my products that I use in the description below, but also on the screen today, just so I don't have to remember the name of everything while I'm narrating. So I'm just rolling it out on a board which I've put an old t-shirt over. I've just put the board inside the t-shirt and it's a good fit. And it's just a good surface for rolling my clay out on. I've also made sure the board's level. So yeah, I'm rolling out the clay, and what I'm going to do is make it a nice thick slab so that there's plenty of depth in the clay for when I press my measuring spoons into it. So what I'm about to do is just cut it in half. It looks quite brutal, but it's not actually going through the t-shirt. I didn't go that deep. I've cut it in half, layered one on top of the other, and then I'm just going to get two storage boxes, which I have, which are about the right height, just so that the rolling pin goes onto the storage boxes and it's level. Oh, and there's an air bubble there, which I'm just getting out with the knife. I was a bit ahead of myself there, telling you what I was doing before I did it. So there we go. And it'll be nice and level. I'm starting out with my largest measuring spoon, which is a 1 tablespoon measure, and I'm fast forwarding it a little bit because I found that it was too big for this purpose, and it distorted, and it ended up being my least favourite pendant in the end, so I won't be using that one again. But you find these things out by trying, don't you? But I left it in just for you to see the process. But yeah, it was just too big and it distorted. The smaller spoons which I used next worked absolutely perfectly, and I was really pleased with the results, so I'll be using those again. It really was a success. Anyway, what I'm doing here is just snipping some fresh flowers. I'm afraid I can't think what those flowers are called. But yeah, the fresh flowers. You can use this technique with dried flowers, but they're a bit stiffer and the stems won't bend quite so well for this particular method. But you can do it on, if you're doing like a tile or something flat, you can use dried flowers, no problem, and you get a really lovely result. But for this I prefer fresh flowers because they're bendier. Now I'm just going to add one of the leaves, and one thing I will just mention is make sure whatever you're putting in, you're putting in the most textured side face down, because that's the bit you need. It is the textured side hitting the clay. That's why the faces of the flowers are faced down, not upwards. I'm just adding some gypsophilia, I think it's called, and it works so beautifully. It's my favourite flower for doing this technique with. It's just so pretty. And now I'm just putting the spoon back in and pressing down. And once the flowers are in there, it's much easier to get the spoon out. The spoon can stick a little bit just because of the suction, but once you've got the flowers in there, it comes out much easier. So now I'm just taking out the flowers, and I've got my tweezers ready. They're good tweezers. Don't try it with really, you do get some rubbish tweezers. It really irritates me. Anyway, yeah, some decent tweezers which you can control well, and take them out really carefully. Try not to dig the tweezers into the clay. These flowers are very delicate, and there were lots of little petals that just got left in. Sometimes you get flowers that come out all in one go and it's great. But then other times, like this time, I chose the wrong one and I had all the little petals and stamen to take out. So patience is key. If you try this and you use the same flowers and the same thing happens to you, don't worry about getting all those little yellow stamen out. Just get the ones that are easy to get and leave the rest, because if you try digging away with your tweezers, you're just going to make a horrible mess. Just leave them in, and then when you pour your plaster of Paris in, they'll be stuck to the plaster of Paris when it comes out, and it doesn't really make a difference to the finish, because it still gives you the texture in the plaster, and then you can just brush them off the plaster. So don't worry about getting them all out. So now I've started with the second one, and I still had a little bit of trouble getting it out. So what I did was I got some oil, some spray oil, and just sprayed it on the spoon and rubbed it on, and then the spoon came out much better. I don't know why I didn't think of that before, but yeah, just a little bit of oil rubbed on with a paper towel and it's fine. So I'm going to speed up the next part because it's just the same thing again and again. But basically what I did was I tried out all the different sizes of spoon, and I did find that the smaller the spoon, the easier it was. I've done 2 of the smallest ones because I thought I might be able to make some earrings to go with the pendant. I decided to cut out the part of the video that would have come next, where I'm just taking out all the flowers and the stamen again, because I didn't really think you needed to see that all over again, and I didn't want you to get bored. Time is precious, so it's making the video a bit shorter by taking that out, and I want you to stay to the end. Right, it's time for the plaster, and for this project I'm using Stonecast plaster, which is a kind of plaster of Paris. It's just a lot stronger, and I find it's a smoother finish, and it also seems to be workable a lot quicker. So in the instructions it says you can paint it the next day. I do prefer to leave it a bit longer, but with plaster of Paris, the regular kind, you do need to wait at least a week before you paint it. So I do prefer this Stonecast powder, and I'll put the link to it in the description. It's 2 parts plaster to 1 part water, but as you can see here, it was thick enough before I put all the plaster powder in. So it was more like 1 part warm water and 1.5 parts Stonecast plaster. Now I'm just stirring it gently with my silicone spoon in my silicone bowl, which I swear by. It is so fantastic for plaster and for resin, because you can just leave whatever's left in there and just pop it out into the bin when it's dried. It's just perfect. So yeah, I love that bowl. Anyway, I'm really making sure I'm getting rid of all of those little lumps. I would normally put my hand in there and have a real good squidge about and make sure I can't feel any lumps. I just didn't want to get my hands all mucky when I had a camera to be controlling. So yeah, I normally put my hands in. The reason I'm being so gentle is because I want to make sure I don't get too many bubbles in there. As usual, I made way too much. I'm always doing that. I just didn't want to run out in the middle of making the video, so I thought, oh, I'll make a bit extra, but I made too much extra. But luckily, I had something else that I could use the excess plaster on, so it didn't get wasted. Right, well, seeing as I had that measuring spoon handy, I thought it would be perfect for using to pour in the plaster. So I'm carefully pouring it into each of the cavities, and don't worry if it goes over the edge, it's not a problem at all. It just snaps off with your fingers when it's all dry. Just snap those little bits off the edges, and I will be sanding the edges as well, and it's very easy to sand while it's still soft. So once your plaster's all in, what you need to do is gently, just whatever set board you've put your work on, just give it a little wobble, a little wiggle from side to side, a little bit of a delicate bang. Don't go mad. A little bit of a bang, and all the little air bubbles will come up to the top. So I left it to dry for about an hour. Half an hour would have probably done it. It does dry really quick, but I did wait an hour, and I'm just demoulding it by pulling the clay away, and the plaster just pops out. Now, depending on what kind of clay you've used, you might have some residue from the clay on your plaster, and that's not a problem at all. All you need to do is get a soft bristled toothbrush and just run it very quickly put the plaster under some water very quickly just to wet it, then rub it with the toothbrush really gently, and then rinse it off under the tap again, and it will all come off nicely. But mine was okay, so I didn't need to rinse it. So you can see there, those coloured bits on there, those are the stamen that I couldn't get out of the clay. So what I will be doing is just picking those out and using a stiff bristled brush to brush them out as well. As soon as you've finished demoulding, you need to get rid of all those little bits of plaster or leftover petals or stamens off your clay and get it packed away in a Ziploc bag or something similar, cling film or anything like that, so that you can use that clay again another time. It will be fine to use again. You might get a few little bits left in there, but it will still be fine for this purpose. So as I mentioned before, it's just time now to take out any leftover stamen or anything else that just needs brushing off with a stiff bristled brush. Not too stiff, it's just like a stiff paintbrush, and gently get rid of everything and clean it all up. Now I'm just breaking off any excess bits that spilled over the edge like I mentioned before, and as you can see it just snaps off really easily. And then I'm just going to get a nail file, an emery board, and clean up the edges, make them nice and smooth. And of course you can also smooth down the base on some sandpaper just by rubbing it around. Put the sandpaper on the table and rub it around on the sandpaper. And especially if you found that your piece is just too deep and you want it a little bit more shallow, just rub it around on the sandpaper until you've got it to the height you want it. So here I have in this cup some water with a little bit of black acrylic paint to make a really thin black wash, and I'm just putting the pieces into the cup and giving them a gentle swish around and just taking them out again. And all that does is it gives the imprint of the flowers just a little bit extra definition. It makes it kind of look like stone, a stone effect. You don't need to do this at all. It's just my preference to do that. You could also try it with a different colour. This is how they look once the paint are dried. It's very, very subtle. And what you can do if you find it's just a little bit too subtle is add a little bit of extra black paint into the wash and repeat the process. Just build it up and until you're happy with it, rather than putting in too much at first, because then there's no going back. So I actually really like it just like this as a stone effect, and you could actually leave it at this stage. Let it all dry out for a day if you're using the Stonecast, or a week if you're using regular plaster of Paris, and then put your varnish over the top. But I'm going to colour this today to show you how I like to colour my plaster. So for today's project, I'm using mica powders to colour my plaster. You don't have to use these, you could use acrylic paint, but if you're using acrylic paint, you do need to allow your plaster to dry out first, at least a day with the Stonecast and a week with the regular plaster of Paris. Varnish it, and then once it's been sealed, you can use paint for it. But today I'm using it on my freshly made plaster, because if it's still a little bit damp, the powder that I'm using sticks to it much better. So I've just got my dry brush, dabbed it into the mica powders and just applying it, and as you can see, it just adheres really nicely to the plaster because it's still damp. You might have noticed that my plaster is a little bit darker than it was before. That's because I decided I wanted a little bit more definition, so I added a little bit more black acrylic paint to that wash that I did, and I put them in again, and I'm a little bit happier with it, a little bit darker. It's a little bit more dramatic. But it's harder to cover. If you get any dark spots, it's harder to cover with the mica powder that way. So it's up to you. I'm just explaining how I did it. So I decided to use pink for my flowers. I love pale blue and pink. The finished effect is like, it reminds me of cherry blossoms. It's got a real spring-like feel to it. Going to add some gold as well, which makes it really look beautiful. The finished effect from these mica powders is very subtle, but don't worry, because once you've put varnish on the top, you can add paint, acrylic paint on the top to give it some extra little details and to make the colours pop a little bit more. But this works really well as a base colour. To make these into jewellery, you are going to need some kind of base for them, or some kind of frame. And I have done one with a wire frame, which I did some wire weaving. If you have a bezel the right size, a ready-made bezel, that will be fine too. But also you can make your own base with polymer clay. I've rolled out my polymer clay to a medium setting on my pasta machine, and I'm cutting out 2 circles. Unfortunately, I didn't have a proper cutter, so I've used the lid from a pot and a knife, and I'm just going to smooth down the edges afterwards. So I'm cutting out 2 circles the same size, and I'm going to sandwich a small jewellery hook between the 2 pieces. And I'm just sticking the 2 pieces together with some polymer clay glue. Sculpey Bacon Bond it is, and that will just help it to really get a good bond with that hook, so the hook doesn't come out. Normally you don't really need to use the bacon bond between 2 pieces of fresh polymer clay. It sticks to itself. I just wanted to be extra sure that that hook would stay in position. I'm really sorry it's slightly out of shot. Yeah, I didn't quite check my camera angle well enough. I thought it was just in the right place, but it wasn't. But you can just about see what I'm doing, and it will move back to where it should be in a moment. So now I'm just putting that top bit on, and I'm going to give it a really good press down to make sure that screw is really well secured in the polymer clay sandwich, I'll call it. And you can see really it could have maybe done to be a bit thicker because it's made a bit of a bump, but it worked fine anyway. And so what I'm going to do next is start smoothing down those edges and smoothing the top. Use a little bit of greaseproof paper to avoid fingerprints, and just use any tool that you like, anything that you've got, just to smooth those edges down, whatever works best for you. I just used a tool that I've had in my drawer for years. I'm not even sure what it's called, but it worked quite well. Anything will do. Now I'm adding some of the baconed bond again, and I will spread it around with my finger again, just like before. Our fingers are our best tools, I think. Anyway, I'm going to spread it around and stick on the plaster pendant piece. I keep searching for the correct word for it. But yeah, you know what I mean. I'm going to stick on the other bit. So now that's stuck on, it's going to go into the oven on that ceramic tile which I've been using to work on. It's perfect for doing this job. And I am going to bake it. And I know the question you're all saying or thinking. You're thinking, can you really put that plaster on the polymer clay and put it in the oven? Won't it explode or something? Well, you can put it in the oven, but it's really important to reduce the temperature to half of what it says on your packet. And if you're doing that, obviously you're going to need to cook it for longer, so you double the time. I've put on the screen here the instructions for what I did, but you do need to check whatever brand of polymer clay you're using, what your cooking time is, and alter it accordingly. Here it is out of the oven, and I have painted it with some polyurethane varnish, and it just seals it nicely before you add paint. And now I'm just adding some darker colours in the acrylic paint just to make those colours pop again. When you finish painting and you've let the paint dry, you do need to give your pieces another couple of coats of the polyurethane varnish just to protect them, and then they're all ready for making into jewellery. And here we have my finished pieces. I've made pendants and a couple of earrings. You can see there's one that I've popped in there that you haven't seen me make. It's pretty much the same method, except I used a dessert spoon instead of a measuring spoon and a different kind of flower. I used a wireframe for that one. And for the others, some of them I've finished off with UV resin. You don't need to, but I do like to, because you can brush the mica powder on top of it just after it's cured, and it gives it some extra gold shine. But you can just carry on using your polyurethane varnish just like before. I do hope you've enjoyed watching the tutorial, and if you're still watching and listening to me now, thank you for staying till the end. I hope you're going to go away and have a go yourself. I am going to be making some more videos like this, making objects to decorate the home with. So if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe and ring the bell so that you get notifications, because there are some more coming up. Bye for now.